Hello, everyone. Good evening. Before I read this to you, I'd really like it if you would turn your cell phones off, please. Especially when we get to Q&A, I cannot move this corded mic out to each of you. I'd love it so that our speakers could hear your questions. Great. So, good evening. Before we get started, I would like to extend the deepest of gratitude from both Plumas Audubon Society and Friends of Plumas Wilderness for your attendance here tonight. We are all here because we have a shared interest in wildlife, and I find that inspiring and demonstrative of this community's dedication to our shared home, so thank you. I am Liz Ramsey, the Executive Director of Plumas Audubon Society, as well as the Conservation and Planning Director at Friends of Plumas Wilderness. Both of these organizations spent much of last year, as well as the early part of this year, working on our strategic plans. And in those plans, we identified a goal of enhancing collaboration and partnership and accomplishing our respective missions collaboratively. So this evening's presentation is aimed at doing just that. It is the third event in our co-developed series titled Cultivating Connectivity, which you can see up here behind me. And we are really committed to making sure that we are presenting transparent science to all of our community members about the ecosystems that we share with all animal species. The series explores the topic of landscape connectivity as it relates to wildlife movement throughout our watershed. And during each of these events, we really ask you all to consider how you can help support and develop conservation and restoration projects. By partnering with local allies, projects like these could aim to protect, restore, and steward wildlife habitats on a large scale, encompassing a wide range of species and their habitats. So I recognize many faces here this evening that were at the April presentation by Mari Galloway, where she spoke about just connectivity in a broad sense. And she came from Wildlands Network and spoke a lot about the Highway 395 connectivity project. And then in May, our very own Paul Hardy taught participants how to utilize UC Davis's roadkill observation system to inform us about how roadways and wildlife interact with one another. So, the Northern Sierra Nevada is a hub of rewilding in California, as shown by wildlife themselves. The term rewilding emphasizes the restoration of missing keystone species. Typically, large predators and other megafauna, an ecosystem's health can be measured by the stability of its apex or top predator, as well as its ecosystem engineer populations. Examples include martens, beavers, wolves, mountain lions, bears, and humans. A classic example of the effects of megafauna reintroduction includes success stories like the reintroduction of gray wolves to Yellowstone, which created a positive ripple effect, increasing beaver populations and reducing overgrazing by elk. And rewilding examples throughout the state are not exclusive to megafauna. For example, Mighty Summit Consortium and CDFW introduced seven beavers, so I think it was like 3 families, to Tasmancoyo in 2023. There are 3 reproducing Rocky Mountain elk herds that are now confirmed in Plumas and Sierra counties. The Yurok tribe successfully reintroduced condors to their historic range in the Pacific Northwest, and your very own Plumas Audubon Society will be releasing 46 Sierra Nevada yellow legged frog tadpoles back into their northernmost population this summer. And a plug for our next event, the Department of Water Resources is studying the feasibility of reintroducing salmon to the North Fork of the Feather River over the next few years. In addition to species restoration, rewilding also emphasizes connectivity between high-functioning and biodiverse ecosystems. We collectively envision a future for our watershed that exemplifies successful collaboration between agencies, tribes, nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, and community members to restore biodiversity and connectivity for our region. For this reason, I'm honored to welcome this talented group of biologists to the West End Theater tonight. Tonight you'll hear from CDFW wildlife biologists Axel Honeycutt, Jay Lombardi, Arjun Deer, and Katie Moriarty from the National Council on Air and Stream Improvement about their research on large and mesocarnivores, including wolves, bears, mountain lions, and martens. Tonight's guests are on the forefront of predator research, large and small, and information from their projects is critical and bettering our understanding, local and statewide, of carnivore movement, life history, and population trends. We hope you'll leave this conversation with a better understanding of these species and their relationship to our watershed. And following the panel, there will be an opportunity for a brief question and answer session with our guests. Additionally, we've prepared a brief survey, both digitally, so there's some QR codes and some paper surveys on the table up here, and we would really, really appreciate your input on this series. So I'm going to now ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and their research kind of one at a time. They have some accompanying slides as well. And we're going to start with Axel here. Sure.
Can you guys hear me okay if I just speak? Or
is this better?
That's better.
Amplification. It's amazing. So my name is Axel Honeycutt. I am the State Gray Wolf Coordinator for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. It is a new position, which is a sign of the expanding wolf population in California. So I've been in this position for about 6 months now. But previously started my career working with grizzly bears in Alberta. Then I spent about 9 or 10 years or so working with various large carnivores across different parts of Africa, and then came back and have been working in Northern California with wolves on and off for a number of years with the agency. So happy to be here and happy to share what we're doing about wolves and an update about wolves as well. There's a couple slides here with some maps. I might cruise through them because I think Liz has a question more specific to some of that, so I'll be able to get into more detail. But essentially, going back to the mid-1990s, when wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone, as Liz mentioned, over the last 25 years or so, wolves have gradually made their way across Idaho, Oregon, and back into California, where now we have wolves that span from the Oregon border down through this area to Sierra Valley and the Tahoe Basin, and then down into, there's one pack down in Sequoia National Forest. But I'll get into that in a little bit more deep. I'm going to skip through all this and all that fun stuff. So anyways, because of this expanding wolf population that we have, many people find it very exciting. However, there's a significant contingent of people in the state that have to bear the brunt of wolves. And that comes at significant cost to their livelihoods, their businesses, and the lives they run. Wolves bring change. Wolves were historically here in California and across the West, and we exterminated them by use of poison and bounties and so forth over 100 years ago. The last wolf being confirmed to be taken in Lassen County 1924, 100 years ago. So wolves coming back is an exciting prospect from an ecological perspective and a conservation perspective. However, since that time, 39 million Californians have moved into the state, along with millions of heads of livestock that feed those people. And that brings many issues. So we have a number of projects that are running because we had a very small population of wolves for the first number of years that they were here. We have the Lassen pack up in Lassen County, kind of coming into Plumas County a little bit. But in the last year or so, we've had an exponential growth of wolves, particularly in this area. And I'm going to touch on that a little later. So because of that, we do have a number of projects that are running. One of them is, the big one that I wanted to talk about that's around this area is with the University of California, Berkeley, where our agency has contracted work through them to do a very large study to basically touch on 7 really big topics. And these are super broad, and we have a very large team to try to tackle some of these. And these span across kind of 2 different sides. The ecological side, part of that is understanding how wolves use the landscape, how much of the landscape they use and why they use it. Diet and scavenging, trying to get at, what are they eating on the landscape? Are we missing things in terms of, California is very different from other western states that have wolves. It's thought that we have less elk, significantly less elk. We don't have other large game like moose and whatnot, so it's critical that we dive into that. Occupancy, where they're going. A really important one is trying to understand, get at the questions around what happens when wolves come back into a landscape that have only been dominated by these other predators, and I point to the other panel for the other carnivores. But the point is, we have a new carnivore that's coming back, and how does that affect our deer populations? How does that affect the other carnivores? How does that affect everything else? So there's a number of ways that we're trying to dig at that. The other big ones are, predation patterns. How are they depredating on livestock? And what are the patterns around that? What is it that different producers are using that's more effective than others that mean that in the data we see that, well, this wolf pack consistently goes to these ranches. Why is that? Is it something that they're doing? And if it is something that they're doing, is that something that we can help fund or try to promote within those communities? And then the last big one is CDFW has a non-lethal conflict reduction program. We don't do lethal take in a state, and that's under the Fish and Game Code for wolves. However, so we are left with non-lethal tools. And at the same time, we just finished a pilot program for financial compensation for both, a number of things, but direct loss of livestock, where we would pay producers out for the fair market value of those losses, in addition to conflict reduction tools that they wanted to use. We would pay for that. So this project is also looking at that, of trying to figure out how effective those were and how we can make them better. I'm going to gloss over a couple of these things, but one of the big things, the initial tools that we're using on the landscape in this area to dig at some of these initial questions that I talked about are camera traps and audio detectors. There's already a project that's on the landscape right now. You see this area down here, these are Forest Service boundaries. So this is the Plumas National Forest down here, where you see all those black dots. Those are cameras that the UC Davis Health Lab has out right now. They also have some up in Siskiyou. And that project was initially aimed at how we could use audio detectors and cameras to pick up on wolves and answer some of those initial questions that I brought up. But now that the population has spread, the Berkeley project is putting out another 200 cameras to add onto that grid that will help us answer some of those initial questions of, and this may seem silly, you might say, well, the agency should already know how many deer there are and how many elk there are. And I'll be honest with you, we're not really good at that. And Berkeley is going to be able to try to help answer some of those questions specific to wolves, because that's the number one question we get after what are wolves doing to livestock, is what are wolves doing to the few deer that are remaining. And we're trying to figure out, are there actually few deer, and what does that look like? Because if there are actually less deer than we think, then that is a potential knock-on effect to the people that live around those areas. So this is the initial work that we're doing. The other thing is we currently have, sorry. Okay.
This is about you guys.
We have GPS collars that we deploy on wolf packs. We currently have 4 out. We currently have 7 packs. With the Berkeley project, we have an additional 25 collars that we're trying to get out. It's a massive push. Part of that is a management side, where we can try to, that helps us inform producers in the area where the wolves are so they can take additional precautions. The other side of that is getting at a lot of these questions. And one of the big ones is diet. And so these collars are very specific, where they for set periods throughout the year, they'll ping at very high frequency, sometimes every 30 minutes. And we have dedicated teams that are going out to be able to try to pick up on everything that they're killing or scavenging off of, to try to figure out the diet. And that's really important from an ecological perspective, and it's very important from the management side of, how many heads of livestock are wolves actually taking, and what are we missing? Because a producer will come back and say, well, I came back with 20 head short. Do we know that that was wolves? Do we know that that's natural causes? Hopefully we'll be able to dive into that a bit more and work with producers to try to understand that together. So this is the initial push that we're doing for this field season in 2024. And then we're going to dive into all those other broad questions that I asked, or brought up. So, yeah, thanks.
So our next panelist is Jay Lombardi. Welcome, Jay. Thank you, Axel.
I have another question for you soon.
Hi, everyone. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So we're going to talk about the outline conservation programs, statewide research efforts here, and then to touch on some work that we're going to be doing here in Plumas County that ties in to the wolf project also. Outlines across the range itself are known by over 40 names, but here in California, we primarily call them outlines, but others, I'd say cougars or Plumas also. Okay. So for the outline conservation program, it was established in 2015, and so we are coordinating statewide research and population honoring efforts to inform habitat conservation and protection of the cats, given that outlines have a unique role in California itself, given that they are a specially protected species since 1991. We also work with multiple external state, federal, academic, and non-governmental agencies on outline projects across the state. Currently, that is numbering up to 16 projects that the state's currently involved in. And the key objectives of the program itself is looking at habitat suitability, demographics, connectivity, gene flow, human mountain lion interactions, as well as how they're also interacting with all the ungulates, with wolves, with bears also. And so to kind of take you through the years here, so outlines from 1907, 1963, it was open season on them, and there was a bounty on them itself. From 1963 to 1969, they were considered a non-protected species itself, so there was a, and then in 1969, 72, they were considered a game mammal with a regulated hunting season. So it's been since 1972 since the last time a Californian has been able to legally harvest mountain lion. There was a hunting moratorium from 72 to 86. And at that time, we thought that the population was anywhere between 500 and 1,000 individuals. In 1986, they were re-listed as a game mammal, but due to a court injunction, no hunting was allowed. Now, following the passage of Proposition 117 in 1990, they were designated as a specially protected species itself. Conservation program was established in 2015, and then currently in 2020, several groups petitioned to list the mountain lion populations on the Central Coast and Southern California under the California Endangered Species Act, and that review is currently ongoing. And based on the genetics of the cats themselves, and you look at these potential suitable habitat here across the state, and we're better over here in the spot itself. When you look at these areas, they almost correspond to the genetic population of the cats. And what we see up here in Plumas County itself, that the genetics are good, and they're pure, unlike what we see on the central coast and in Southern California itself, and that's largely due to the connectivity in those areas in Southern California as compared to up here where there's a lot more highways. Okay, so currently from over the next years or so, the program is undertaking a renewed statewide effort to better understand mountain lions, and this is following a 8-year effort to really get this ball going, to have a better understanding of some bigger, large-scale issues for mountain lions with like habitat suitability, genetics, and so forth. But from all that, there's a lot more questions that come about. So these things include looking at connectivity in the context of highways and urbanization itself, looking at outline a conflict and how they are interacting with humans and livestock, and looking at tools for reducing a conflict. Also, as I said earlier, looking at interactions with deer and elk and wolves and bears, and then through all of this, trying to refine what we know about the genetic population of cats. So here, Plumas County, and this is something that will connect with the Wolf project that at Axel is what we're working on with ADOC Berkeley. What we do want to have a better understanding is how mountain lions are impacted by wolves. What we see in other parts of the country is that when wolves will move into an area, it affects the cats' ability for habitat use, what they're killing in terms of prey, as well as an overall abundance. And the interesting thing with the mountain lions here in Plumas County is in 2016, 2017, the state did collar cats here in Plumas County. So we have a good baseline of the habitat and the other things, the areas that those animals were using before packs came in on the landscape. And then our hope is that we can look at and that will bring us to later this fall, and winter, we hope to get out in these national forests with hounds to catch cats, to collar them, to have a better understanding of how they're using these landscapes, and then also how they're interacting with wolves. And lastly, a lot of this is done through regional operations. That's it.
We're going to save that question slide for after we've heard from all of our speakers, and next we're going to hear from Arjun.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Arjun Deer. I'm the new statewide black bear coordinator at CDFW. Started about 4 months ago, at the end of January. Like Axel, I worked a lot in Africa as well, about a decade with hyenas and lions, African lions. Yeah, since January, I've been here, and my life is all about bears now. So, a little bit of background. The black bear program sort of technically started in 1917. But our most recent bear management plan is from 1998, which, to give you some context, I had just finished first grade, so it's been a while. We were due for an update. The exciting thing. The new plan uses a much more modernized approach to survey the bear population and estimate bear population sizes and trends across the state through an integrated population modeling approach. I don't want to bore you with statistical jargon, but it's a much more modern way to count bears. And so the new plan, which is currently in draft form right now, is undergoing public review until June 14th. You're all welcome to comment on it. It has two main goals. The first is focused on bears themselves, and it's to conserve black bear populations that are abundant, disease resilient, genetically diverse statewide and regionally, and to conserve and enhance their habitats. And the second one is focused on the human side, because bears interact with humans a lot. And that's to provide opportunities for black bear hunting, viewing, and public education, to minimize human black bear conflict, to consider animal welfare in black bear conservation, and to be inclusive of all Californians and all perspectives in black bear conservation decisions. And so a major way we're doing this, or sort of implementing our plan, is to monitor bears not just statewide, which the 1998 plan did, but to monitor them at what I call bear conservation region levels. So a more localized approach. So we're actually intensively monitoring bears across 9 bear conservation regions. As you can see in this map, 4 of them are dashed and 5 of them are in solid color. So the solid ones, including the Northern Sierra Bear Conservation Region, or BCR, which is in yellow there. Solid ones are where bear hunting currently occurs, or is allowed to occur. The dashed ones are where there's no hunting. So we want to monitor them in both areas. So we're putting GPS collars on bears. We're hoping to get 120 collared total between this year and next year. We currently have about 50. So we're making good headway there. There's a few in Plumas County. I can't tell you where they are, but they're out there.
We can.
We're everywhere. So that's kind of the main focus. I'm doing a lot of field work with a lot of great regional biologists across the state who work with me. So I have a lot of support, and it's going very well. And yeah, my presentation is super short, so that's really it. If you have any questions, I've listed my email address there, and I also added a URL to the the public comment form. If you want to read the bear plan and comment on it, maybe we can get that link to you as well afterwards. Yeah, that's all I got.
Last but not least, here is Katie. Well, this will be really different. Unlike these charismatic megafauna and your state game biologist, I'm a researcher studying an animal that's about a crown. And what you'll realize very quickly is that even the smallest of our carnivores are extremely complicated. And that's okay. So martens are a member of the weasel family. Some of the characteristics that you might know is they eat about 1/4 of their body weight every day, and anything can eat an animal the size of a squirrel. So that is including lions and wolves. I haven't heard of a bear eating a marten yet, but there's time. So I first started here, I gave a talk at the Federal River College in 2004, and then I started my marten research here in 2008. So over this last 16 years, I've had an opportunity to work with 8 wonderful master's students, a lot of great crew leads here on the Lassen National Forest to learn about martens. And with this team and this time, we have become the global center of marten research. We are on the names of the biologists in Poland and the UK and Scotland because this data set is so impressive. And I don't want to take too much of your time, but some highlights that are a little recent that might be useful to some people is that martens are a cavity denning obligate. Often they're considered an older specialist. So this little small mammal are often in these very, very large structures like here, and down there. And this 2023 paper, led by Matt Delheimer, who's now in the Sierra Ranger District, provides a flowchart of how martens used dens that were of these structure size and what were the surrounding features in those areas. My PhD was mainly focused on defensible field profile zones and forest thinning. So we looked at a combination of factors, and what we learned was through an experiment and movement data, martens were almost 1,000 times less likely to go through an opening and almost 100 less times to go through one of these thin units. And if you think about a marten, and I've probably told some of you this, it's like how we would behave if the world existed with pterodactyls and velociraptors, right? Anything can eat them, so anything that's open is risky. We also use GPS collars, just like our esteemed colleagues here, except for mine were the smallest in the world, and we were the first to use them. So imagine a collar that weighs about 1/2 of a AA battery, about 7 nickels. But even so, we learned so much. So these are points from one male marten near the Caribou Wilderness, and we took 6 months to get these data. And then we put our GPS collar on collecting data every 5 minutes, and this is 2 days worth of information. In fact, we learned they use their territories the same year-round, no matter what, some of the same exact paths. And this was consistent. They would move through the circumference of their range on average every 4.6 days. They're moving between 6 and 7 kilometers every single day, nonstop, which is why they have to eat 1/4 of their body weight every day. And this is really globally interesting because the same day, 5 days on average, is the same for martens in Sweden and the same for martens in the UK. So, pretty exciting. And over the last 5 years, for a variety of reasons, I've really had a lot of personal challenges. I've had to grow. I'm still not done growing emotionally and mentally, I'm sure. But I've had a lot of challenges because I have been a large proponent of martens living in these older forests. And one of the things that I had the opportunity to do at the same time as all this other great research was unfolding is execute a brilliantly large survey to look for the range distribution for fishers, which is this animal at the bottom here, and martens. So we put out over 2,500 camera locations and over 1,500 units for detection dogs, collecting over 2,000 scats for all the carnivores, in which we use DNA metaphoric cutting to look at diet. And one of the surprising things, there's lots of things that came out of this research, but one of the surprising things
is we found a population of Pacific martins on the coast, all throughout Oregon and even in Northern California. And this is so surprising to have martins in one of the highest off-highway vehicle recreation areas in both California and Oregon, 400,000 users in the summer, full-time, huge massive events. And then these martins were so compellingly weird that my colleague Mark Flanell quit his job to try to figure out what was going on because we had no money to study this. And if you see from that picture, those trees are not large, they're not old growth, and they're not over 70 years of age. The structure is very complex, but it's not what you would consider typical habitat at all. And what we've seen is these martins don't den in cavities, there are none, and they must be denning underground. It's the highest density of martins in the world in these dunes. Smallest home ranges, and weirdly enough, even though they have the smallest home ranges, a female is less than a half a square kilometer, they move the same amount as the martins here in Lassen. Same averages around the circumference of thigh. And some of my more recent work, doing GPS collar work, shows that these martins are using some of our most managed landscapes in the Northern California coast. Even clear cuts that are a day old, but they're very different than our clear cuts here. And I tell you this, I know it's a different population, to bring us back to something very local that also took me 5 years to figure out. Took me a lot of courage to come back here after 16 years and then having everything I know burned. But I was fortunate to work with some great collaborators, Dr. Audubon and Michaela Diamond Gunther at Cal Poly Humboldt, and 3 magnificent grad students. And over the last few years, some of you have coordinated with Chris Collier and Alyssa Roddy to put out over 500 cameras in the Dixie Fire, in both Plumas and in Lassen National Forest. The M's and F's are martins and fishers, and the B's are both, respectively. And this is really interesting. The most surprising thing to me is that the map that Chris Collier made a few months ago for predicted occupancy for 2024 or 2023 is nearly identical to the one created by Heather Reskian Ramos in 2010. Pretty much it looks the same to me. And this is very unexpected, and I think there deserves like a little bit of a caveat, because when we have the result that martins are positively correlated with high severity fire, I really don't think that, like, don't burn things and expect martins to come. I don't think that's going to work out at all. I think that martins went underground and the Dixie was hot and fast enough in this area. We have one instance in the world, I've talked to a lot of colleagues around everywhere, and we had one female FO3 that was under 7 feet of snow and 14 feet of dirt, the size of a squirrel. So we know martins can go very deep underground, and that could have been an insulative enough environment to withstand high-intensity fire in this one case. So one of the things we have now is a new grad student, and her team's in the back. Shout, team. Is that too awkward? Yeah! They're back there. They're going to start tomorrow and try to count how many martins there are. And this is another unfunded, exciting, no genetic money. We're going to try to do it anyway. So anybody know of any money? Exactly. It's pretty, I'm begging. And I'm okay with that. But it's really interesting because when you think more broadly about geographic ranges and where some of these very difficult species can live, Alexander von Humboldt in 1807 was basically like geographic range is a function of temperature, it's a function of where animals can survive in their thermal neutral zone. And that's true for a lot of species, lions excluded because they can live wherever they want. And I think there's a lot of confirmation bias for some of these species about what they need, because we have a challenge with this altered ecosystem, both with killing all our predators in the early 1900s very aggressively, very aggressively, and all those strychnine bait things would also be eaten by marten, to a state where we have other species that can kill massive amounts of particles at this point. So That's what I wanted to share. It's like a catalyst for conversation.
How about that, everyone? I want another round of applause. So I planned for this evening's presentation to go until around 8 o'clock. So we're around 7:15 right now, and I think I'm going to ask as many questions as I can before I open it up to Q&A. If that's okay with you all? Cool. So I heard a lot of conversation about things like the Dixie Fire, which we would anticipate would be a challenge and almost eradicate certain species, or motorized recreation that in this case with martins didn't seem to bother them too much. So one question I have, and I'm opening this up to all of you, is what are the primary threats to carnivores in our region, and what conservation strategies are being implemented to mitigate these conservation threats?
We drew straws earlier. I just forgot. Yeah, so, wolves are, the year-end, so the way that we count wolves is, maybe just back up a second, yeah. So how many wolves there are? We have, at the end of the year, we counted a minimum count. So we don't do estimates. We know how many do we absolutely know for sure as a minimum. And last year, at the end of the year, because that's when we basically have our final count is on December 31st, we had 44 known wolves as a minimum in 7 packs and 2 areas of wolf activity. So those are areas where we know that there's definitely 1 or more wolves. Usually it's 2 wolves, but we haven't confirmed them as a pack yet because they haven't been persisting on the landscape or they haven't been reproducing. So with that said, that it is a, compared to, I'm going to call it your number, what, 80,000?
65,000 bears.
65,000, sorry, I was thinking bigger. 65,000, Jay, what's your?
We don't have an official, but it's about 20 times less than how many.
Still quite a bit. Do you have an estimate? Okay, I'll wait. But anyways, the point is 44 wolves is a very small number. The state probably hires the most people per wolves than any other species because of that. Yet still, it's not enough. But that's because they do require a lot of protection. They require a lot of work. Finding wolves on the landscape, on average, our packs are about 420 square miles in size. To give you a little bit of reference, if you were to go to Wisconsin and look at wolves, their average pack territory size is about 60. So we're looking at very large pack areas, not a lot of wolves. So the point is we're getting to the threat. Or not the threat, but the conservation concern with wolves is that wolves have only just returned, and from the state's perspective, because they have returned naturally, we have listed them as a state endangered species, and they are currently a federally endangered species as well, so they have full protection within the state. With that said, it would not take very much to cause harm to that population and delay that recolonization. So the ultimate, I don't want to say it's a concern, but the ultimate, maybe the topic that we want to shift to is working with people that are living with wolves, whether they want to or not, and trying to work with them on what happens when wolves come into your community and what does that look like, because we have had on many sites of different things there in terms of highways, like Jay mentioned, with connectivity. About half of the wolves that we know, we have known mortalities in the state, have been caused by vehicle strikes, wolves being hit on highways. The BAM Sail Pack, which is in Sierra Valley, is often seen off Highway 70. So there's definitely a connectivity concern. We have had wolves seen on 395, wolves crossing I-5. Wolves disperse very long distances. We had a wolf from Oregon came down, or 83, that went all the way down and was seen as far north as just north of LA. It's a very long distance to travel. And what they're doing is they're trying to find mates. They're going out to find. So the point is that California wolf population is in its very infancy. We don't know where it's going to go, but at the moment right now is at a point of a very fast growth, but that does mean that it is still very susceptible, and that also means inbreeding as well. Many of our packs are, I won't say that they're inbred, but for instance, the Van Sale pack is 2 half-siblings, or the 2 alphas. They have the same thing in a couple other areas of packs, and that's just because we're at the very tip of that dispersal pattern, kind of all the way from Yellowstone. Wolves have slowly made their way, and we're just like, there's a spearhead coming down to California, so they're barely able to leapfrog each other, if that makes sense. So from that side, there's definitely the working with people that are living with wolves, and then there's the side of connectivity, highways, and then things that we just can't control. If I can't make 2 wolves breed and say that they're siblings or not. It's not my job to move them from place to place. We want to leave them wild. And this is just something that does naturally happen when a carnivore or any other species moves back into the new area. Sometimes there are these genetic bottlenecks. So anyways, that's from the whole side of things for your question.
Anyone else want to tackle that?
All right, so I think for the cats, there was a study that came out about a year ago or so, and it had said that when we looked at outline sort of eyeball from 1972 all the way up through 2020, what we saw is that human induced mortality was additive to what we would expect mortality and sort of survival of lions to be. So highways are a major impact on our lions. Obviously, as I said, some of that is a lot more pronounced in areas with higher densities of highways. But that said, mountain lions are still killed on highways in the urban region itself. And then it goes into legal take from lions that are in the conflict situations. And what we see is the areas of higher of a conflict, which across the state itself is largely in the foothills. So areas that have lots of smaller properties itself, usually in the western Sierra, that's going to have your highest areas also.
See, I do. One thing that's fascinating to me is probably one of our biggest threats for these smaller mesocarnivores, these rare, is the lack of large carnivores. So mesopredator release has been well studied, where all the large predators are gone, and then foxes and raccoons and these smaller animals are actually carrying a lot more disease. So I'm really concerned, for Martin's sake, about disease and competition and predation from these other predators. I know, podcasts.
I'll be quick again. So yeah, 65,000 bears population was increasing over a lot of the 20th century. It's been pretty stable for a little over a decade now. But they're very healthy, genetically diverse, and it's because a big reason is just because bears are so flexible, ecologically flexible. They eat anything. They can really live in a lot of different places. They can change their daily patterns from being more nocturnal or more diurnal, depending on human pressure. So they're extremely flexible, and that contributes to their success. On top of that, we have indications that roadkill can be an issue in some areas regarding connectivity, like some of my colleagues mentioned for their species. Disease, we're seeing things like encephalitis, which is swelling of the brain. It's a symptom, not a disease itself, but it's a concern that we're monitoring. that's pretty much it. I mean, fire and climate change, bears actually sort of enjoy a moderate level of fire because it makes the habitat more diverse, so it gives them areas to den, more snags and things like that. So they seem to do pretty well, and simulations have shown they're going to withstand climate change well relative to a lot of other species. So it looks like they're hanging on quite nicely.
So I'm going to ask one more question before I open up for a Q&A. And I have an idea of who might answer this question already. But it is, what measures are in place to manage human-wildlife interactions, especially in terms of preventing conflicts between these large carnivores and local communities? Something I think is a hot topic here in our community.
Can't scare me. Well, yeah, not to make light of it. But yeah, there are, as I mentioned earlier when I first talked, California is the only state that doesn't have a lethal removal of wolves. We don't have that management option. Part of that is because of the listing of wolves as an endangered species within the state. I should say that CDFW, our agency, when wolves first did come back, we actually were asked by the State Fish and Game Commission, for a recommendation on listing wolves. And at the time, there was only really thought to be 1 or 2 wolves. And our agency actually suggested that wolves should not be listed as an endangered species initially. And the thought behind that was that we could then have those potential management opportunities. And that's not to say that we want to kill wolves. That is not. But the point is, now that they are listed as an endangered species federally and state, we don't have that option. And I don't mean to jump right to lethal, but that is an option that we do have with our other large carnivores as well. Should conditions get so bad, or the situation be that serious, there is that level of management that can be taken. I don't think it should be the first thing, but I do think that when you're dealing with large carnivores, you do need to be flexible. And I can touch on some of the other things, so that leaves us with non-lethal methods to be used in the state. In terms of what the state actually does, in some areas we do have, well, now we have even more, but there are, well, I don't mean to laugh, but it's one of the techniques that we use the most is one of the oldest techniques, and it's a technique that was created in Europe in the 1600s to actually kill wolves and hunt wolves, and it's called fladry. It's literally just a rope with red flags on it, and just that little bit of movement in the wind is enough to spook wolves. Wolves are there's this idea around wolves that, they're big bad wolves. They're these bloodthirsty animals, particularly humans as well. And a lot of that stems from the history that we have in Europe, where wolves in Europe were prone to rabies. And they would kill people. They would kill lots of people. We do not have that issue in North America, and as a result, there's only been 2 records of wolves ever, lethally taking people. And so because of that, wolves are generally, they're curious of us, and we do see that where we have wolves that walk right up to people. There's a reason why we have dogs. Wolves are, one very brave, more stupid wolf walked up to a human. But with that said, that is a pro and a con. Where wolves are not afraid to go into human areas, but on the other hand, sometimes they can be extremely spooked by us, and that's one reason why we see wolves occurring in some of the least humanly dense parts of California. So with that said, there's a variety of different methods that we use. Unfortunately, a lot of it comes down to the individual producer to, it's not the state's, in my opinion, it's not the state's right or place to tell people how they should run their businesses or how they should manage their livestock. We do have recommendations, a variety of different techniques, and sometimes that works for someone and what they have going with their business, and sometimes, that doesn't. And we're constantly seeking new ideas. Some of it is changing husbandry practices, calving at certain times of the year, doing nighttime feeding. There's a variety of different things that have been shown to reduce conflict in certain areas, particularly in Oregon and Washington. With that said, there is still conflict. So these are not silver bullets. There is no one answer to that. We do have the collars that I mentioned that we're putting out now. Those are GPS collars, but they also emit a VHF frequency. That's the old school, Hades, very few points versus many. With the collars that we're putting out, they emit a frequency that allows us to potentially deploy what are called rack boxes, which are boxes that can be put on the landscape where if a radio collared wolf comes within a certain distance of it, it can set off basically alarms and sirens and whatnot. There's a variety of different, kind of going back to more old school methods of range riding, having people on the landscape. But obviously that means that now producers, businesses need to hire those people, they need to employ them, they need to be out. So it can be a very time and resource heavy thing to protect livestock and reduce conflict of wolves. And that's one reason why we had the wolf livestock compensation program, the pilot program. And the hope is that we will get that program back and be able to continue to fund that into the future, because wolves do come at a financial cost and a human cost to having them on the landscape. And I like wolves, I like seeing them on the landscape, I think they're cool, but I understand that they also come at a cost to people in our communities. And so that's why I don't think I'm not trying to be like, yay wolves, yay Yellowstone. Even if I have those personal feelings or not, I do understand that wolves have brought change to this community and communities in this area. So with that said, we're constantly looking for new ideas, and there's a producer up in Oregon that came up with a kind of a cool idea where it's like kind of like a Roomba, your vacuum, but it deploys feed throughout the night in concentrated areas. And that might seem like a really simple idea, but that allows cows and other headed livestock to plump up, which can potentially reduce conflict. There's another one that just came out with the USDA Wildlife Services is exploring the use of drones and blimps. You might say, well, blimps? We're going back to the Zeppelin age. But the reason blimps is because then you don't need to have someone who's controlling it, you have a constant power source. The point is there are people that are constantly, their job is to just think about how do we answer this question. And I think technology is one way, but we also need to be working with those communities, sharing information between producers in different areas of what's working for them, and again, just include the human element in it all. So, yeah, I hope that answers that. It's like, again, quick topic.
Thank you. Another question I have, kind of leading into what you talked about with technology and building off of it. We've heard a lot about GPS collars, correct? But I wanted to open the floor to any of you to answer about any other innovative technologies that are being used to monitor, to learn more about each of your respective species. So are there any technologies you'd like to share with the group?
Well, one thing we're interested in doing with the bears, actually to preface this, to estimate bear age, so far we've been using the teeth from harvested bears. Basically you slice them open and the number of rings in the teeth tells you how many years old the bear is, so it's like a tree kind of. But that's obviously pretty labor intensive and has to be hunted in the first place. So one thing we're looking into is measuring what are called DNA methylation levels in their hair, or their fur. And so the more DNA methylation that's going on, the older the bear is generally. And we can kind of calibrate that and create an epigenetic clock. So if you're collecting hairs from a bear that you've been monitoring since it was 8 weeks old, as the methylation levels go up, you can track that with its age. And so we have a nice sample size. We then have an epigenetic clock for the whole population, and so we can start calculating their age in a much less invasive way. We can even set snares out on the landscape. When the bear walks by, it gets lightly pricked a little bit, picks up the hair, collect the hair. We can tell how old this bear was. We can tell its sex. We can tell its individual ID from the genetic data. So it's an emerging tool. Alaska Department of Fish and Game is currently developing it right now for polar bears and brown bears. And black bears are kind of in the trial phase now, so it's a very exciting frontier that I'm super pumped about. It's going to be expensive, and it's probably going to be a project for next year once we get these collars out, but yeah, that's a nice thing we're working on.
mountain lions, besides collars, well, one of the other things that we do use is to help aid in the genetics of the cats across the state itself, and to help kind of building regional pedigrees of the cat itself. So this will be done using dogs and finding the scat that is on the landscape itself. On more if we are to catch a cat, on more wildlife services is able to tree a cat. What we can do is take a skin biopsy of an animal, and then from that we can individually identify that animal. And some of these techniques have been used to help us gain a better understanding of the population size, and that's something that we are currently working on also.
Perfect. All right, so some of the great things that have been mentioned are these, so one, remote cameras are pretty cheap. But one of the challenges with remote cameras is that wolves and lions and bobcats, et cetera, avoid them as much as they can. So often we get a lot of dumb animals that come to cameras. And that's really problematic because for me, we're getting about 100 times more detections of juvenile male than we are adult female. But we're trying to figure out biologically relevant opportunities for conservation, and I don't really want to make a juvenile male novel. So the detection dogs are actually amazing because we can get scats from all of these species using the same team. So I've opted for the Lion Project, got Martin scats, and for my project I've given the state of California lion scats. And using those scats, everybody poops the same. And that is fundamentally so much better from a scientific standpoint. And we can't get things like DNA and which animals and how many. And that's going to be really exciting. We're about 8 years behind lion genetics, step development.
Yes.
I have some more questions for you later about scat. So 2 more questions. This one is, how do carnivores, large carnivores in particular, but martens as well, I'm sure, contribute to the overall health of an ecosystem, in particular the Upper Feather River watershed?
Well, we're talking about carnivores. Bears are actually omnivores, I have to admit. So they assist with seed dispersal. First of all, they love fruits, and that's an important thing in terms of plant growth and nutrient recycling and things like that. They eat a lot of berries, so that's kind of the plant side. But then they're also predators. They like to eat deer fawns, and they help regulate prey populations, insect populations. So because of the diversity of their diet, they do a lot in that sense. And yeah, that's easy.
For the cats, it's interesting within a landscape where there are other carnivores, like wolves and bears. The cats themselves operate in a subordinate place to wolves and also to an extent to bears. The cats themselves, in the areas that they are operating and are living, their main prey is deer and they're not killing the healthy ones. They're going to look for the injured animals, the particular animals that they perceive to have a weakness itself. But moreover, there's been some other studies that shown that even when a mountain lion does make a kill, or when other carnivores or omnivores will make a kill itself, the insects and the beetles and the other smaller species themselves, like coons and fox and stuff, can benefit from those kills on aggregates also, which can benefit those populations.
This is so much fun. So I'm not going to convince you that a 1 pound animal is changing the ecosystem. It's not true. However, one of the things that we need to think about with the members of the weasel family, so all your otters, mink, fisher, wolverine, marten, they're on an energetic edge, right? The way they're moving is more than a mountain lion every day. This little animal the size of a kitten is moving more than his mountain lion friends. GPS data confirm that. And so if they don't eat in 3 days, they die. That means if you have martens or fisher or mink on your landscape, it's an indicator of something that is healthy. Either there's low predation and low competition, or there's high prey. So if we relax our feelings about it being an old growth obligate, which I kind of tried to dispel a little bit earlier, then you could still be proud that it's an indication of some sort of healthy environment.
Okay, last question. Oh. Okay.
Take any opportunity to speak. Yeah, so wolves, how do wolves help the landscape? And you mentioned the Yellowstone example, and I hate to be the Debbie Downer on it all, but there's been some recent work that has kind of popped some holes in that of like, well, was it just the wolves that caused rivers to move? Was it just wolves? And there's a lot going on in that time. There was heavy winters, there were elk that were dying like crazy. So it's very hard to, unless you have an ecosystem engineer, an animal that's physically, like a beaver or an elephant that's physically changing the environment, it can be really hard to say, like, is this individual species making a difference in some way? And so in Yellowstone, there were some interesting things that happened after the wolves came, but it's very hard to pinpoint on that if it actually was wolves. And a case in point of that is that there are over 60,000 wolves in North America, and we've never seen that happen anywhere else. And we haven't seen it in an open system. Yellowstone is by and large a closed system in the fact that it's managed as a national park, very different to all the surrounding land. So I don't mean to be, I feel like I'm going to get it down here, but the point is, wolves, I don't expect rivers to change in California because wolves come back. With that said, there are some changes that I think will happen. Jason mentioned earlier the fact that mountain lion densities will probably decline. That is something that has been shown in other states that have wolves where they were reintroduced or naturally came back. Some areas in Wyoming and Montana saw as much as, I think, a 70% reduction in mountain lions after several years of wolves being in that area. So that is something that we probably expect to see mountain lions, maybe not to that extent, but we do expect mountain lion densities, basically mountain lions to potentially be displaced by wolves as they take over or take their place in the landscape. So that's something that could potentially offset. It's not just going to be this compounding thing that there's even more and more carnivores. There is some self-regulation that we've seen there in other western states. There's another impact on potentially Sierra Nevada red fox and other critically or endangered species, smaller species. where wolves can have what's called a trophic cascade, where a large carnivore, potentially their presence reduces the density of kind of a trophic layer below them, the foxes, the coyotes. So we do expect to have lower coyote numbers. Since wolves were eradicated in the West, coyotes have just absolutely gone through the roof. And that is something that has been seen in other areas where wolves have come back, is coyote numbers have come down in those areas. So I'm not saying that wolves are bringing great things to us. But the point is that the presence of this large carnivore, this apex predator, returning to this ecosystem will cause some shifts in balance of the different guilds that are out there. So that's something that we can't expect to see in the first couple of years. It might take decades. But with wolves being on the landscape, it ultimately will bring changes to the animals that they interact with.
Lastly, I have a question about policy for you all. What policy changes or initiatives do you believe are necessary to support long-term conservation of large carnivores in our region? That's a good answer. Aubrey says money.
What policy changes? Well, a couple things. One is, my colleagues did mention some of the management plans that we have for each species. We do have a wolf conservation or management plan that was written at the time when we didn't even know if we had wolves in California. It was in 2015, it came down in 2016. That was the time that the Shasta pack came down into Siskiyou County. So that plan is out of date. We do, with my position being on board now that we actually have a state coordinator for wolves, we are planning to update that. And with those updates, obviously, a lot has happened. We have a lot more wolves, we have a lot more packs. There's a lot more impact on Californians with wolves. And so currently we do have phases of California wolf recovery, and those are kind of outlined in how many breeding pairs we have. And a breeding pair is 2 wolves that have pups, with at least 2 surviving until December 31st. And so this was last year was the first year that we actually met the first phase of that by having at least 4 packs that were considered breeding. So that means that we're in the beginning of the first year of phase 1. So the point is, we do have, I guess where I'm going with this is, we have those phases, and they don't have any teeth behind them. There's nothing that leads to, hey, once we get to 100 wolves, what do we do? That's not in a plan right now, because that was written at a time where we didn't even know if we were going to have wolves. And so that's something that is on our agenda the next year or two, is to update that plan, to reach out to stakeholders and re-engage with our stakeholder working group for wolves to try to get feedback on that and try to figure out where is the guidance from there for management of wolves. But the other policy I would point to, which I already mentioned, is the compensation program. Wolves are actively taking livestock, and that is something that has even happened today. And at the moment, we do not have a compensation program. Our pilot program, we used the funds, we exhausted the funds on March 8th, was the last day on that. Our agency, it is not necessarily our place to petition the state legislature. However, we have been doing everything in our power to try to get funds for that. Hopefully I don't have to tell anyone in this room about the state's budget at the moment. However, I can say that the state senators and legislators that I have spoken to, particularly in these areas, have been adamant about getting some sort of funding relief for additional non-lethal programs and the relief for direct loss, actual loss of livestock. So those are, I believe that policy alone would already be a significant step to wolf recovery and assisting the people that are in these areas of wolf recovery as well.
Okay. So I think it's time for questions from the audience, right? I would love for somebody to raise their hand. Over here in the blue, your hand went right up.
Yeah, so if I understand you guys correctly, you've increased the predator population pretty substantially over the last 20 years. Consider that a success. My question is, what does the data show for the prey species that they're eating and for interactions with humans and for livestock depredations. What does that data show for that time period?
So, which species was that for?
Well, for all the predator species, but, I mean, you guys are pretty proud of the fact that you've increased all these numbers, but what does the data show for the deer herd population or the number of denied depredation permits for livestock kills, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, I can speak directly. As I mentioned earlier, part of the project that we're putting forth in this area is a big one towards trying to get at really fine-scale dietary information for wolves using additional GPS collars with really fine-scale data to see, how many deer they're preying on, what other species they're preying on, native wildlife, and then also, livestock. We have livestock investigations that we do that producers come to us and say, hey, I believe that I had a cow or a calf that's been killed by a wolf, and we will do that investigation along with, typically it's wildlife services that assist us with that.
But I guess my question is, you
Yeah.
guys do deer surveys in this area.
Yeah.
What's the trend of that population since we've had completely unmanaged predator?
Gotcha. Sorry, thanks for redirecting me there.
Do you guys know? Sorry.
The thing is, we work across the state, and
But I think you can see that our deer herds have been decimated. There's a lot more human interaction with predators. There's a lot more depredation. How do you factor that into this unlimited increase in predator population? Or is that just the goal, or what's your equilibrium?
yeah, and these areas in Northern California, the data that I worked with up in Siskiyou, because that's where I used to be a local biologist, those deer herds, projects that we had done on those, they were shown to be half in decline and half stable. And some of the data behind that showed, because it was part of the mountain lion project, so let me just speak on mountain lions, but some of that was, shown that mountain lions were potentially killing more deer because of higher numbers of bear. That per numbers of kills that were being made, because of the density of bears in those areas, that bears would get onto those kills quicker, or more likely to get on those kills, parasitize on them, so get on them, which then would cause mountain lions to potentially, have to kill more because of that.
So at what point do you start managing the predators, I guess is my question. And obviously, things are out of balance. And is the goal just to continue increasing the predator population? So what?
I mean, we have very clearly outlined for all of our species conserving them. For obviously these two species at least with bears, of having a quota, there is still hunting through management, or management through hunting, I can say. Obviously with protected species like mountain lions and wolves, we don't have that in the state. So the management actions that are taken are largely through our non-lethal programs and our conflict reduction programs.
Yeah, so, that I don't work with anything large, but I do want to remind people that there are some really interesting co-mechanisms. So around the decline of some of the deer in the early 90s, in theory, was also the Northwest Forest Plan and the reduction of clear-cut harvest. So it had nothing to do with predators in some places. We reduced their forage. So we've done a lot of foraging studies on nutritional value for deer. And that's also something that's happening at the same time. Good news, y'all. A lot of fires have made a lot of open areas that's going to produce a lot of little forbs for everyone. So maybe we'll see a lot of deer. And you could test that in about 10 years. And that's about how long it'll take us to
Rid of all these predators,
I also just want to mention, similar to the way we were monitoring bears previously, the deer monitoring approach wasn't the best. And so we're sort of doing a revamped approach using fecal DNA surveys, so transects, basically counting deer scats. And that's currently ongoing right now as we speak to develop more robust estimates of deer population size. We have a deer biologist now, a statewide deer biologist who's leading that effort. So we're going to have very robust population trend estimates soon for deer. And that's currently in the works. Sure, I just...
Other questions from the audience?
Sure, right here.
I
I just had a question for Jason, just on the population of the mountain lions now in Plumas County, because I got the, what was it, 1972. What is it currently, do you think?
We currently don't have a estimate of specifically for
This county.
county. We are in the process of finalizing an analysis for mountain lions across California itself. As soon as that's done, I would be happy to share that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions? Yes, sir.
So, I've spoke with Axel before, about a week ago or so. Right now, the pack in Clover Valley it's been identified last year as a very aggressive pack in harassing cattle, killing cattle. And we asked then, what can we do? And we've got, well, we're looking at this, we're looking at this. Now, within less than 30 days, we have 4 confirmed kills. And one was yesterday, one was today, and you have 2 from prior. I asked then, what are we going to do? Because the 15th of June, there's going to be about 500 more head of cattle in there. The elk aren't there. The deer aren't there. And I hear, well, we're going to do a study, and it's going to take up to 2 years. We're having the issue now because the elk and the deer aren't there, and now they're on the cattle. I asked last week, what can we do non-lethal? Can we harass them with the drone? Well, it's been mentioned, we don't have time to do a 2-year study. We're losing cattle now, and it is going to be a financial issue, not only for the rancher that's losing them, but for the people that have done their life this way. I understand that we want to work with, and that's what we're trying to do, but 2 years on this pack isn't working. So you're talking about range riders, you're talking about this. Economically, it doesn't work. So my question is, this aggressive pack, non-lethal, can we trap them? And you guys can move them somewhere that you think they won't be. Take them to a park. I mean, we've got to do something, and we've got to work together. And I talked about that, but we don't have time on this pack. Last year, they run them off permits, they've run them off deeded ground, and we was told, we're looking at it. Use a non-lethal. We're talking acreage, so the flaggery we talked, it doesn't work there. Dogs work well on sheep or in a controlled permit and or deeded. We're talking 1,000-acre places. This is a very, very aggressive pack. What can we do? How are we going to work together or help each other now?
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate the opportunity to collaborate. You know, I want to be able to work with you guys on the ground, and if there are solutions that the agency can help with, I would like to be able to, help offer our services, and if that's getting our staff out there to try to help, with.
I asked that, and I asked you, can we harass them like they do the bears and that?
Yeah.
And you did say you would look into it. We don't have time to do this 3 months down the road.
They're killing every day.
And
And that's the issue with the fish. We are bound by the laws of California. And I am sorry
I get
about
that, but
And the Fish and Game Code for wolves is harassment is intake. Now, what I said about, looking into that is there something that can be done in the short term of, what is the jargon, what is the legal jargon of that? What is the gray area in there of harassment? You know, is there something that can be done if you're allowed to chase wolves off if they're within a quarter mile of livestock? I think that's something that I've spoken about with, you know, with some of our higher ups in Sacramento, or, you know, is that something that's going to be fine? Because I agree with you, there is something that needs to be done. And trust me, I feel horribly powerless in this position, and I want to be able to help however I can. Yes, sir.
Not only that, I used, you know, years prior, before the wolves have come in, there would be 50 to 75 deer, 100 deer in the brush. I can take you out there now. They're moved a mile into the meadow in the willows. There's nothing on the hillside.
Yeah, and you know, it's difficult to say if that's a behavioral change to having these carnivores back out. You know, it's...
Excuse me, they are right next to us, and we live in Genesee. The people were out feeding their cows, and the buck with broken horns ran up to them, and behind him were two wolves. The whole buck's rear end was eaten out. He was in shock. He was running to the cows and the people for protection, and they had to run the wolves off with sorting flags, and all they did is go to the edge of the field and then wait till they were done, and then came in and chased him some more and ate him alive. That's not normal wild animal behavior, to be that proximity to all of us and our animals during the day. Because usually they hunt at night, which is a difficult problem as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, wolves can predate and can hunt during the day and during, you know, different crepuscular hours, dawn and dusk as well. You know, the fact that they are actually, you know, evidence of them going after bucks is a good thing. It's a good thing that they are using the wildlife that is there. So yeah, in that regard, yes, the proximity of them to people, as I mentioned, wolves obviously have, I won't say an affinity, but there is a level of tolerance around humans, right? And that is why we sometimes can get very close to them. So their comfortability around us and being able to hunt in front of us, you know, obviously in a national park, that's a great thing to see. But,
Yeah.
you know, when it's in your
Well,
backyard, I know it's a different
the
situation.
wolves come right by our house in the mornings. They trot by. You don't let your dogs out. You don't do anything. They howl all around us. You know, the deer come right in close, and then the wolves come in right after them. That's not something that is a basis for something to be building on. This is not sustainable. These numbers, as they grow, the bears are bad enough, the lions, whatever, but as these numbers grow, how is it sustainable just to let it keep growing and they're eating all the deer, plus our cattle and sheep?
Yeah, no, I do hear your points, and I appreciate you sharing them.
You know, we've heard this over and over. Every meeting we go to, that you hear us, you shake your heads, but no one knows how bad we're getting beat up. They think we're the bad guys because we supposedly took out the wolf. Well, I've talked to my family's been there a long time. In the 1870s, there was no wolf. This was probably a lone wolf. I'm not saying there wasn't wolves in California, but I'm wondering if they were in our area. It doesn't make sense that they were everywhere because most predators aren't. But I can't handle any more phone calls from my neighbors telling me, what am I going to do? They just killed the fourth one in 4 days. And there's no help. You've given no help. From the very beginning, you told us you would put collars on them. We got 4 collars. Some of them work, some of them don't.
And they won't give us the data anyway.
You just haven't been able to. And I understand your hands are tied. But I want my friends here in Plumas County to know we're getting no support. And you know it, and everyone else knows it in our area, that they're eating more livestock than anything else because there's no deer left. Why don't you want to deal with the deer commercial, the deer situation? You waffled all the way around it. There's no deer except the ones living in town or on the farm. That should be our biggest priority here tonight. Why are we letting one species take out something that's been here forever? Our famous mule deer. We got to do something, and I don't want this meeting to end like every meeting. I want some commitments from you that you'll work with us. We can't win. We're 1% of the population. And every vote that comes out of the city, we don't have a chance. This should have never happened because there was no study done saying there's enough food for the wolf to come in. Everything else, there's a 5-year study. All of a sudden the wolf's here and that's fine. And you do know where it's going to go. We keep saying it like this is something new. It's not something new. It's been going on in Idaho and Oregon area. We know that right now all we're doing is letting the wolves build up. And pretty soon you can say, okay, you can shoot a couple of these wolves. And then everybody should be fine. We won't be fine. It's going to take the whole state. It's going to be devastating to the state. And then we're all going to wake up and it's too late. So we're willing to work with you, but it's got to be more than we're doing this and that. Well, I want a meeting with your boss or whoever, because they don't know what's going on. These people don't know what's going on. But some of my neighbors can't sustain it. And you think it's just the wolf kills. It isn't. It's what they do to that herd. They won't breed. They won't settle down. Some guys can't take their working dogs with them anymore because the cows are so afraid of the dogs that they just take off running. It's ruining things, and it's like having some burglar still coming into your yard every night. Yep. And you know somebody's going to get eaten or taken or something, and we have no more private property rights left because we're letting a piece of paper tell us who's right and who's wrong.
And for one, too, you guys did a study before the wolves even came here. Why? Like, are you going to do a study on elephants this year? Because there might be elephants here in 2 years? Like, that didn't make sense to me at all.
What about a flagging?
You did a study on wolves. You said it.
No, I'm sorry, I'm confused. We did a study on wolves
Before they are even in California. But why?
No, we didn't do a study. I'm saying that we created a management plan.
A management plan,
Yeah.
but why? But are you going to do a management plan on elephants this
No,
year?
because we saw that wolves were coming south through Oregon. It was supposed to be in preparation.
They didn't come via trailer or anything?
No, no. We
No,
have
not at all. Not at all.
So this conversation has kind of turned less away from Q&A for the rest of the crowd, and I'd really encourage this conversation to continue after other people have had an opportunity to ask some questions. So I'd like to open it up to Linda here.
There's a lot of very interested manpower in this room. I have seen the flagging deployment up in Mountain Meadows Reservoir to try to deter wolves from crossing lines because of cattle there. Is it possible that we could mount an immediate flagging project and use the manpower here to go out to red-cloak them out?
There's too much acreage.
Too many acres.
And it doesn't work anyway.
It doesn't work at all.
Not after a while, no.
Pretty smart.
Is there
Because it's
any
small
other,
areas.
is there any other thing with the community here that we do want to help our neighbors?
Yeah, sure.
Is there anything else in immediate that we could deploy this week, next week?
Thank you, Linda. Other potential projects that we could do to address this immediately? I think that's the concern, is that the community is feeling as though this waiting for the results of the study isn't quick enough when their own livelihoods are being threatened. And that's kind of the whole point of this evening, is to be able to open that floor for civil conversation. And it sounds like there's kind of a misunderstanding happening here. So what's the solution is what Linda's asking. I'm not sure that we have that here tonight. Is that the solution? Is that this conversation needs to happen? Like this gentleman in the back said, we need to have a meeting?
A meeting would help.
Yeah, a meeting
But-
would help, okay.
But it needs to be sooner than later because we're losing cattle. It's gonna be more and more daily.
Understood. Dan?
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, it seems you just told us that the reimbursement for ranchers who lose cattle to wolves from the state has all been used up. So it sounds like they're eating a few cows.
Right.
So my question is my whole life I've been listening to both sides, if you will, right? And I'm curious as to how you can explain the difference in not even conclusions, the difference in observations of reality between the people who live with the wolves and who interact with the wolves every day and defend their cows and their property from the wolves every day, and people who study them from afar. And at what point are the people who are studying them going to give at least as much weight, if not more, to the observations of people who deal with this on a daily basis versus gizmos strapped on animals handed out by Berkeley? And I guess that's my question. At what point are we going to start working together and listening to each other, as opposed to having experts show up and give us data sets that don't corroborate with anything that anyone who lives with these animals is seeing? And so I would like to explore that possibility.
I would as well. Thank you, Dan.
Right here?
Thanks. Kent Loudon's been working on this for about at least 3 or 4 years. He's doing a pretty good job.
Well, we know Kent really well.
Yeah, contact him.
We contact him every day. I text him before I can,
All right.
so, no, we're in close contact. He asked me if Alex, I asked him if Alex was his boss, and he said no.
Who is his boss?
I don't know.
So it sounds like, oh, I have another question right here.
Yeah, aren't there environmental groups that will compensate for cattle loss? It doesn't have to depend on the state funds, but go right to, I don't know, the Sierra Club or Center for Biological Diversity or something, and have them get involved.
The question is, are there other groups that may compensate from the state?
Yeah, there is definitely some interest from, in fact, there was down south.
No,
I can just, so I can speak to, I know in other states, there has been a non-government organizations that have helped fund and there has been interest expressed to me about these non-governmental organizations finding pots of money for compensation programs itself. But that's something that's needed to develop outside on their own.
Yeah, I know there has been some interest from conversations I've had with various environmental groups in California that have, knowing that there was going to be this period of not having a compensation program. And we have been exploring all of those options and trying to find sources of funds.
Actually, you stated a second ago that we are seeking funding to keep the depredation program going. You kind of alluded to the fact that there's not going to be any funds for paper presents. Is that correct, or did you just gloss over that when you made those statements?
Yeah, I apologize. There is, paper presence is still on the table there. I just failed to mention the third prong. So thank you for correcting me there.
I'm not sure, but I thought the website where you filed your paperwork has been shut down. So who do we file the paperwork with?
So currently, we are asking people not to submit applications because those funds are not there. However, the last time when we got this pot of money for compensation, we were able to retroactively go back and distribute funds for direct losses that occurred prior to the funding. And the hope would be that we'd be able to do the same thing.
Well,
so
here's the other side of that vote. You have eliminated the documentation of what these animals are doing. The minute you shut that down and say, well, just hold it, and when we get money, file it, who do we give this information to so you can understand that they're not eating deer, they're eating livestock and they're doing it heavily? I mean, you talk about documentation and justification in that, so you need to leave that door open, otherwise you're not doing a full study on your wolf or on your lion or on your bear.
No, it is an excellent point, and the way that we were funding direct loss, so there was where you filed, right, you're correct about that, but we would go back to if you had a livestock investigation done. So those, if George comes out from Wildlife Services and does an investigation, that is the paperwork that we would go back to. Is that.
Okay, I understand that, but you're using it now for documentation to repay, and that's kind of good, but there needs to be somebody that we can hand that paperwork to so that we know in your study as to what these animals are doing, where they're living, and what they're living on. You have an up-to-date record of it. I mean, take the funding out of it. You want to know what your wolf is doing, we can give you that information, and I know George documents it well, and I know the system that it goes through, but that was for the funding. So how do we get it to you for the documentation? So when you do your wolf study, you can say, these wolves are eating more farm animals than they are wild animals, because the wild animals have already been ate.
Yeah, no, and thank you for asking that, because we, prior to the compensation program, we had livestock depredation forms, right? And so those are all on our website going back to 2015, 2016, from the first depredations, and we update those and try to do it every month. That document, that form, whether there's money involved or not, that is the documentation of is that a confirmed kill, is it not, what was the animal, how many were involved, which specific wolves were involved as well, if we have collected genetic information there. And so that is the documentation that is being used to say, this is how many depredations there are.
Another question is, who does Kent work for?
Kent Lawton is out of our northern region, Region 1. So he is based out of our Reading office. He works, his supervisor is John Prine. He's a new gentleman that just started. And the environmental program manager there is Jeff Stahl.
My understanding is you're getting another possible wolf specialist for this district. When do you expect that to happen?
Yeah, so we have made an offer to someone, basically an equivalent of Kent, that would be based out of the Chico office to help service this area. We're hoping that that person will start at the beginning of July. We have also just flown a position for Sierra Plumas. That's the local biologist here. We were able to put a portion of funds for that person to also spend a dedicated amount of time for wolf. So that person will also be able to be of assistance. So that is, in addition, Kent has been working the entire state for the last 7 years.
So then, to kind of try to get a date out of you, as Mr. Roberti had asked, is can we meet with you and some of the other people within 2 weeks to discuss, within 2 weeks, so that we can discuss, can we do just like they do with bears, harass them enough to kind of move them back away from us?
Yeah, I can tell you that I would like to meet with you, or your group, or you, or the select, however you want to organize that. I will speak with Kent tomorrow, since he's the only other wolf biologist that we have in the state.
Yeah, but
and we can figure out a time that would work
but
for
we
us.
need somebody up the chain that can say yes and help push that through, other than just Kent. We need, we all got bosses above us. You're wanting to help, but you need to talk to people above you. We want those people at that meeting.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with the power. So I would like to invite those people as well, whether it's a branch chief or someone else. I will convey that message first thing tomorrow morning.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Teresa, do you have a question to close us off here? And then we're going to end, because I like this. No?
Oh, well,
That's
no,
all.
I just watched, I have 2 questions.
Okay, let's hear them. And then we're going to wrap things up here. And if you guys would like to continue the conversation after the panelists are done answering this question, we can do so.
Well, related to this,
recent conversation is, what has been shown to be the most effective deterrence? Because like we know about flattery and there's like those flashing lights and you said range riders and talked about drones and stuff. So it sounds like people don't trust flattery to be effective, but curious if.
Yeah, it's a good question, but it's a very complicated question because every operation is totally different. You know, some people are on open range, some people are, have different methods. And so to say that there's a silver bullet, there's not. To date, we have not had a confirmed kill within flattery. However, flattery only works on a very small number of situations. So it is not the end all be all. We can't flattery all of California. Even if we can buy it, we can't, it doesn't make sense. So there is no, in terms of the data that we have in California, flattery, again, we haven't had a confirmed kill in there, but it's only on a very limited number of circumstances. So I don't have a better answer than that, unfortunately.
Can I ask one more? It's more for all of you. Okay, so somebody posed this question to me and I couldn't answer it. They said, can you have an overpopulation of apex predators? And aside from humans, I could not think of yes as an answer. Is that that could be a temporary situation. Have you ever heard of overpopulation of apex predators? Besides humans?
I was just talk on the cats themselves. What we've seen with outlines is their populations are going to depend on their on the ungulates that they're eating. And a caveat in that, obviously, is if there's other carnivores on the landscape, as I said before, mountain lions do not like wolves and don't like bears, because both species take their kills. And in the case of wolves, can cause those populations of the cats to go down. So the cats themselves are in a tight situation that they're not going to hit that population high that you would see unless they're going to be the only animal on the landscape itself. Unfortunately, in Plumas County, Northern California, that's not the case. There are lions and there's a lot of bears on them. I ask you.
Just add to that, regarding bears, I'm glad you asked that. There's an interesting idea I'm trying to test or look at. It seems like bears, sometimes their densities or population size can get sort of artificially inflated in urban areas. So you have this source sink dynamic where wildland bears, for example, in wilderness areas, come to more urban areas like South Lake Tahoe, and they breed very well because they're eating a lot of trash, actually, and a lot of carbs, and we go to dumpsters, and so the mothers produce a lot of milk. They produce litters of 3 or 4 cubs, even 5 cubs have been seen, which is rare. It should be 1 or 2 in the wild, maybe 3. So you get this kind of big hump in the population, but then they start dying off more because of roadkill, because of disease. Disease spreads more easily because it's transmitted more when there's a higher density of bears, and the population kind of dwindles again. So it's the kind of this temporary blip, and then it goes down. And so that's an idea I'm kind of looking into, and it seems to be, with bears at least, kind of this urban versus wildland interface.
Hey, so, great, I mean, that's awesome that they die of disease and stuff, but why not you guys all get paid to the fishing game. Where do you get your money? You get it from hunters, conservationists, right? So why not let them harvest more bears, bring it out more to where people can harvest more bears. I'm not saying bring dog back or anything, but it's like, why not let them harvest more bears and bring it down instead of letting them get hit on the highway. I mean, and then two, for the wolf and lion guy, hey, have you guys seen the Colorado thing? Your lion ate a wolf in Colorado. So you're saying that, oh, lions go away from wolves. Well, wolves are eating, or lions are eating wolves there.
If it's a one-on-one situation.
Sure.
It's going to lean potentially more on the cat's side, but obviously wolves as a pack animal are going to chase that cat and so forth. So that's that dynamic there. So on one-on-one situation, there's really not an issue there. The problem is when you have packs in an area that are controlling an area, that's when the cats are affected.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a really good point with the hunting, the bear hunting. So right now, harvest levels are only about 2% of the population of bears in the state. So it's very low. Only about 1,200 bears are taken each year by hunters. They have about 65,000 bears.
Right.
For it to really regulate the population, it could be up to 15% or 20%, like in Maine and some other states, Minnesota, there's much more hunting. So
sure.
There's certainly a lot of wiggle room. The thing is, the quota right now is 1,700 for bears.
Right.
And we don't even scratch the surface. It doesn't even come close.
Sure.
It could be, it's harder to hunt bears when there are no hounds, when there's no bait, when there's no second season.
But why can't we have a spring bear season?
That's a really good thing that I'm looking into. And
Have 2 seasons instead of 1,
Yeah.
or let dogs back.
So the dog thing is a scent bill, that's out of.
Sure, right, yeah.
But yes, I mean, second tag, spring season, these are things that are being considered that the plan potentially could lead to. We need to
But
see.
eventually though, like you're saying, like eventually maybe letting dogs back, but now with the wolves coming back in, now people can't run dogs because the wolves, it happened in Idaho a lot, in Montana, where the dogs would bay a bear or a mountain lion or something, and the wolves come and kill everyone's dogs. It's documentation of that. Yeah, the wolves would.
This conversation has been great, and I hate to interrupt you, sir, but I think that's all the time we have for Q&A. You're more than welcome to come up and speak with any of our experts.
You don't mind just take a second. So the Department of Fish and Game has done pretty good communication in terms of press releases whenever there's a new pack or there's some pretty puppies or whatever. You never once have done a press release for a depredation. Do you think you can bring that up to your higher ups to see if maybe you can paint, the true picture and not just the Disney version that seems to come out of Sacramento?
Amen. Yeah. I actually just took over the website very recently, and I can start issuing those. Basically, whenever we issue depredation permits, I can do those same news blasts so that it is more balanced.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to stop questions here. I really appreciate all you guys coming out tonight. I think we learned a lot from these guests. And they educated us, they shared a lot with us, and they learned a lot from us. This conversation is not over, and I appreciate the diversity of opinions and beliefs and feelings and experiences that were expressed here tonight. Please continue to keep in mind ideas for projects. We've heard some great ones here tonight from a number of different individuals. There are surveys here to take your feedback. If there are questions that you didn't get answered, you would love to articulate them to people.